Well, hello, all, and thank you for coming. My name is Alpert. Um, I am 3 days from finishing my PhD program at UCLA and at Cal State LA. I'm a joint doc, and this is from the research from my dissertation work. The name of this is CSU Special Education Reading Methods Courses, What We Teach and How We Teach It. Well, I'm going to zip along the best I know how. Please do ask questions anytime you want to. A brief bit of background. All of the courses I examined in this study were the initial reading courses for special education credential candidates at CSU campuses. About half the courses were housed in special education programs, general education programs, teacher education programs, and the like housed the other half. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call them all just courses. And the people who take those courses, the special education credential candidates, I'm going to call them candidates because the language gets kind of messy. I asked two basic research questions. The first research question asks, what is the curriculum in these courses? That is, what are students supposed to know? What are they supposed to know how to do? And then peripherally, are there differentiating typologies in here? Are there different, is there some kind of system to say there's 2 kinds of courses, there are 6 kinds of courses? I did that. The second research question asks, what are the means of instruction in these courses? That is, what methods, strategies, materials were used to teach these courses? And with this also, were there some way of differentiating the typology? To answer the questions, I gathered and analyzed documents, and I interviewed people who taught the course. There were 22 course descriptions for the 22 courses, and there were 16 syllabi from courses that responded to document requests. 10 of those syllabi were from special education programs. In the other 6 were from elementary. In addition to the document analysis, I conducted interviews to triangulate and enrich my findings with 3 professors of this course. One was an adjunct who had taught a very teacher-centered condensed version of the course for a special education program. She was a grad student for most of that time. The 2 others were assistant professors, one from a general education program who kept a very student-centered course, and one from a special education program who taught a thoughtfully balanced course. And I'm afraid I need to take a moment to describe these terms. The way I used teacher-centered was focusing on where was the source of information for that course. Were the strategies, methods, materials, or explicit descriptions about the candidates forming the knowledge? That would be student-centered. Or if they were being taught, okay, now that when you are teachers, you're going to have your K through 12 students formulate the knowledge, construct the knowledge. That's a student-centered approach to reading instruction. Conversely, if the professor was the source of knowledge, or if in a K through 12 classroom, the teacher is the source of knowledge, they're trying to convey the knowledge to the students, that's a more student-centered approach. And there were many, many varieties of balances amongst all that. My dog has gone nuts behind me, hasn't she? 7 themes emerged from these analyses. I'm going to focus on one. I think this is the most important one down here at the bottom, and I'll talk a little bit about it. I wish I had focused on this from day one. It seems to me that this is the heart of the matter. There were many ways that these courses tried to convey knowledge one way or another. There were 3 ways that I saw that there were to teach teachers how to teach reading. The most common one was a practicum. You've been taught this for several weeks. You're going to find a student in a classroom and you're going to assess and teach that student. Or we're doing this with a formal practicum where you're with a student teacher somewhere, or you are a student teacher somewhere. You're going to find some way inside that classroom to teach a lesson. There were two other ways that I thought were interesting. One was practice teaching in a classroom. That ain't bad, right? In the college classroom, you're teaching to your peers. And a third, which surprised me a little bit and felt very student-centered, is that the candidates would be doing the kinds of things in their college classroom that they would want their students to do in the K through 12 classroom, like have book clubs and share outs, things like that. Thought that was an interesting approach. I'm already past my 5 minutes, so I don't need to go on to this on and on. But I do want to land on this point. I took a big cue from Fred Korthagen, who did one of the keynotes, and I liked what he was saying. I liked his emphasis on putting the practice first, and the theory will follow. My balance would not be precisely his. I think the what and why of teaching always go together. So perhaps I would not wait quite so long as he does to follow up with theory. But front-loading the praxis of teaching seems to be something that when I taught this course, I did not do at all. I was all about theory as I taught this course. And I think that was a real shortcoming. I think it's a missed opportunity to make teachers who are better at teaching reading. I think the way to have teachers who are better at teaching reading is to precisely teach them to teach reading with less emphasis on all of the why. The why has to be there. I don't think it needs to be front-loaded so much. I've taken a lot of your time. Thank you.
Anybody want to ask any questions of Hal before we move on to the other presentation?
I'd be happy to field questions before discussion.
Or we can save them till later. It's a small group, so anyone speak up if you have anything you want to ask right now, or we'll come back to it after we've heard the other one.
I have a question, and we can take this now or later, however you decide. I would like a little bit of clarification, teach what you want candidates to do. So the first priority, is it like teaching to the test and CLB type thing, real life for the classroom?
So your audio was not perfect, but what I think you asked was if we front load the praxis, is that like teaching to the test?
Yes, yes. Teaching, teaching them to do well in your classroom or in your course or in the classroom, in the day-to-day life. Yeah.
My emphasis would be the real life teaching part. My emphasis would be when you are on your career and you are the adult in charge of having your students learn to read, be better at that. Get this head start. For most of the programs, there is exactly one course that candidates are taking before they take their RECA and get their credential and start teaching. I would like to use the bulk of this course for getting them ready to teach reading, rather than knowing the gobs about reading that I was very, very, very pleased with myself about being able to share with them and have all these lovely slides that laid it out in great clarity. It's not the great clarity about theory that they need. It's actual technique. I know that from my theoretical background and my preferences and my way of seeing of it, what those kind of techniques would be. I think it would be exactly as important if someone disagreed with me entirely about the techniques and thought teaching should be taught differently. I'd say it's just as important that they know what to do when they're a K through 12 teacher, how to teach students, especially because this is about special education, especially about this teaching students who have the kind of reading troubles that we're likely to see as special education teachers. I have different thoughts and feelings about teaching to the test. I'm not sure how much you want me to get into that.
Yeah, that's precisely why I asked. Thank you so much. Wonderful answer.
Thank you.
Okay, Hal, would you unshare your screen then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Nilsa, or whoever's going first.
I think it's Michelle Dean's group that's going.
They're
next.
not with us at the moment. So
It's
you guys go next, Nilsa. And
Okay, perfect. So Katie, go ahead and share our screen. All right. So welcome to our presentation, Teaching Students with Disability During the Pandemic, Impact on Special Ed, Teacher Candidates, Sense of Self-Efficacy. I'm Nilsa Thorsos, and Katie Klinger and Gabriela are co-investigators of this research project, and we're from National University. So this presentation, what we did was we wanted to examine the impact of this whole phenomenon, this hot mess we are with the COVID, that created this impact of shifting from in-person teaching children with disabilities to an online remote learning delivery during this COVID-19 pandemic. So we invited participants for the study, interns and instructors in the teacher preparation program from a large private university, meaning National University. We looked at the intern's sense of teacher efficacy, that, they were pushed into this to make the shift to an online platform. The study exposes the learning barriers and challenges of online teaching. But the big issue here at the heart of the matter is when you're teaching children with disabilities, you have to really look at are you going to meet the needs of these students, and how are you going to stay in compliance with IDEA, which is our mandate. Our methodology was a grounded theory approach, and we really we included an electronic survey, and our research included 3 phases. And we began with sending out an online survey to faculty and mentors charged with providing support and supervision for interns. So, Katie, you want to go next?
Well, the first findings that we had, we had 6 questions. And the first question, I'll read it since you're recording. We were interested in the challenges that the candidates met in ensuring that the IEP goals were addressed. We analyzed these into 2 themes, positive and negative, Hal. So positive theme is the teachers and the supervisors all felt that we had met the IEP goals. Now, remember, everybody was thrown in March into these online teaching formats. They had no support. A lot of them didn't even have training. So they basically were learning how to do whatever it is they were supposed to do on their own. And it was a quagmire. They had no idea what was going on. So the negative theme was the idea that even with all of the rush support that they had, 22.5% felt that they had not met the IEP goals. The next question had to do with, did the candidates themselves believe that how did they feel that they met delivering the content to their TK-12 students? The positive theme was that many of them felt that they were able to do this in some format or another because, number one, they knew their students. And number two, they trusted that whoever was home with the child was working in concert with them. And so when we broke this down, we found that the two categories with the negative themes that people felt they had a large 28.57% lack of access to the technology and internet. And again, because the children were at home, even though somebody was there trying to help them many times, the student didn't want to log on. And if the parents did log on, the student couldn't make that connection that that was their teacher on the screen. How? You know what I'm trying to say? It's kind of like, I see that person, but this isn't the same as being in my classroom. And so student engagement was a very heavy negative theme, 21.43%. Our question 3 findings, which is where we went back, as you were saying, that you identified in your presentation, the differences between teachers and candidates. We call them candidates also. So the candidate teachers were looking at the needs of their students. So now we're back at that level where the interns and our teacher candidates are saying, how did, let's be honest, how did we really do? 36.36% said yes, 30.68% said no. And you have to give these people credit. They were being as honest as they could, because a lot of them, pretty high percentage, if you think about it, felt they were just doing their best. And, in life, as we all know from our elevated positions and in higher education, sometimes that's all you can do is your best. And then you have to hope that there are other support systems woven around them that will help reinforce whatever's going on. Question 4 is, how did the district, what was their role in preparing these teacher candidates for the shift? And we waded through all kinds of data. And finally, what popped up was the fact that it was the online training. That, again, this percentage that felt they had no training, and some of them really didn't understand what was going on. That's the ambiguous part of it. I mean, it was like, okay, I took a workshop 2 years ago. I don't remember anything from it. Our 5th question had to do with who and how were they supported? And this was a question that Gabriela and I were extremely interested in when we were thinking about this. And then when we all started looking at the data, we realized it was not just one-stop shopping. It wasn't just one provider giving the teachers their support. It really was the school district. They really were trying to help, and then the institutions of higher education. But it was their collaboration together. It was the people like you, Hal, saying, this is how you teach reading. Well, this is how you teach reading online now. That's where they were coming from. And our last question here is, what modifications, accommodations were really put into place? And they were using the same thing we're using now. They were using Zoom. And within Zoom, they were trying to do small group work. So some of the teachers who are more advanced did understand how to put the students in rooms, online. And then, of course, in special ed, you always have the people who prefer to work one-on-one with a student. So as you can see, we've got over 70% where it's Zoom, and it's just back to what we do as teachers, right? At every level, we work one-on-one with the student when they don't understand. Gabriela?
So these were the results that we got from responses given by faculty. Our special education from National University faculty, and this includes adjuncts, full-time, part-time, all kinds of, associate, we call them faculty, so that's part-time. Actually, we didn't have enough responses from the students because we launched this during the summer. So we got a lot of answers from faculty, but phase 2 is going to be student candidates' responses. We got a little bit more, but we're going to analyze them next. So as a conclusion to everything that has been said about our research is that the challenges are meeting. Can we go back one, please? The challenges is that we are having issues for our teaching candidates to meet the IEP goals and services. So teaching online is not really ideal for the children, for the students, because there is this disconnect. You know, how do you teach special education, especially moderate severe? You still need the one-on-one, you still need the touching, like graduate guidance, you still need the physical prompting and so forth. And then, for example, with students with autism, how do you get their attention? If they are in their own room, in their own world, it's even harder to direct their attention to learning anything. Another challenge is access to technology, internet. And of course, this has been vehiculated a lot in the media and in all the studies, and this study comes to confirm that. Student engagement, like I was mentioning before, is another challenge of teaching students with an IEP, and especially lack of parent support, because parents probably have their own jobs, their own, schedules during the day, and they log in their their kids, our students, and then that's about it that they can do for a while, maybe for a period, for like a I don't know, 50-minute period, 40-minute period, and then they come back and check on them. So they're not there all the time to direct their attention, to help, and so forth. So basically, parents are not replacing teachers and the one-on-one support. Another challenge is that meeting the needs of children with disabilities is a problem. So our teacher candidates report a lack of self-efficacy teaching online, which we kind of talked about this. Katie talked about this earlier. I'm not going to elaborate. Challenges, the last one, is that there are concerns about support services for students, for students with an IEP that are not fully delivered, because the district either doesn't have the resources or doesn't come up with solutions fast enough. Next slide, please. So the next phase is to analyze the data from teacher candidates, and we will conduct focus groups, Zoom, collaborate with teacher candidates, and then we will look into collecting data from parents and mentors. So teachers that are out in the field, already finished with their teacher credentials, that are mentors to our teacher candidates.
Thank
So
you,
we have big
Gabriela.
plans.
Does anybody have any questions for us?
I have a good number of questions.
Ooh,
Well, I'm going to try to keep it focused. I was looking at the numbers early on, and I was noticing that by and large, it all added up to 100%. And I kept on wondering what a percent of what? How did that?
Of our responses.
So what that makes me think is that when you sent out a survey and you asked the question, the respondents picked the one that fit them best.
These were actually open-ended questions. So we had the question that you saw in there.
Yes.
And then we coded. We went through, and Katie actually can speak more to this.
I was going to talk about our methodology, but was worried that we only had 5 minutes.
I know.
So didn't unpack our methodology. But we followed grounded theory, and then we did discourse analysis from the open responses, and then moved on to text analysis. And we had a very elaborated system, and we triangulated. So those are the numbers we ended up with.
So as you did this and you coded out, those percentages are of the codes that you got, not specifically of the responses you got. So of the number of people you saw, some people might have fit into several of those codes and might be represented in several of those codes.
Yes, there were like 92 responses. And then we had an Excel spreadsheet. We didn't use SPSS. And as we went through, we coded, and then we set out of 92 responses, how many fit into this category. And that was how we got our percentages. Now, what we did find is that some people were all over the board. In other words, when you have an open-ended question, they put everything in the kitchen sink in there, right? We thought later that it might have been easier to have had some kind of guidance, like a checkoff list, and then maybe just an open-ended other, so that it would be easier on a package like Question Pro or something like that, you know, that you could take it into even more statistics. But that really wasn't our goal here. Our goal here was to simply try and understand what our teachers had already been sharing with us in all of our courses, because we all teach on the master's level, right? We all have terminal degrees. So we always open our courses with 10 or 15 minutes of, how are you doing today? What is happening in your classroom? And then all of a sudden their classroom became their home. Yeah. And these incredible stories that came out is what prompted Nilsa and Gabriela and I to say, somebody has to capture that. Now, legally, we can't capture and use that when it's in a course. In other words, we video, you know, we use Collaborate and Zoom for our own course sessions, just like you have those course syllabi and things that you research. So when we're actually conducting class, we can listen all we want, but we can't use that data because it's actually in a course. We have to ask for that data outside of the course, and it has to be voluntary. So that's when three of us got together, and Gabriela and I and Nilsa decided, well, what would the questions look like? Now, in making them open-ended, it made it much more challenging.
Yeah, but the themes are emerge through the layers and layers of the analysis. So we did follow the procedure and the protocol. And so our plan is...
The categories have emerged through the data analysis, not because we created them. We didn't want to limit the answers. We wanted as open as it is to capture the reality, not our impression or speculation of the reality.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, even though it would have been much more convenient for us to have had a checkoff list, right? We could have then tidily put them, say this, 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 and this. That isn't how it happened. And you know why? Because that's not how their lives are now out there. Their challenges are some that they never ever, especially the older teachers, thought they would encounter in their teaching career.
And I suspect that during the focus group, we're going to be able to really grind down to more specific themes and data, more specific. But we did follow the methodology for grounded theory, and expect to find more. This is just phase one. How?
Yeah, well, I thought that they were enlightening themes, even though they're just phase one. That is hardly a critique. I thought that was really meaningful themes and findings that you got.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it confirmed what we were hearing from, say, maybe over 100 students in our own courses. And the students who responded to our survey were not necessarily those teachers for 3 or 4 months prior to that had been talking to us. Sure. Because the way our courses are, our students advance through their courses. And we have a different format.
And we were really curious about, here we are as a teacher credential program, preparing teachers to teach person to person. That's our whole mantra here. And then COVID-19 happened and threw us, into this paradigm shift where these interns are forced to deliver services online. So that's a phenomenon, and a very curious one that we need to start paying attention to, because there's no going back, folks. This event is going to impact all professions, all service delivery, especially in special ed, where we rely so much on hand over hand and, in person. So what's going to happen here in the future,
I think
post-COVID?
for our field, this gets meta. We are teaching about teaching, and we are living out the theory and the techniques that we're teaching, or we're noticing that we are failing to do that. And
yeah, and the impetus is that here we are in the 21st century, and it really forced us to separate from the mindset of the teaching delivery from the 20th century. Because here we are immersed in all this technology, but yet we have the mindset that the brick and mortar, and that's the only possibility. So this is forcing us to think out of the box, our special ed box, and look at our role as where are we going to go from here? What is going to be the best way to provide services and support for students with disability? And the big challenge will be those with moderate to severe.
yes,
That require extensive services and very specific therapies and interventions. This is going to be a great, I see it as an opportunity for our field to get out of this box. And there's only one way to provide these services. I feel that this is a great opportunity, but it's also a warning to the teacher credential programs that we need to start looking at preparing our candidates to teach in multiple modes, not only face-to-face. We need to snap out of that and looking at different ways for service delivery that doesn't include face-to-face only. It has to include other ways, because look what happened. I mean, here we are. I never dreamt that this would happen in my lifetime. And in a year, we've experienced so many new things that it's going to it's going to make that shift more significant for our field. I really see that. Thank you, everybody.
sure. At the risk of monopolizing a bit too much time, I want to know.
Don't worry about time.
We have time. Here I'm worried that there's another group coming.
I will go on and on.
Unless somebody else shows up, that there were 5 groups invited. 2 of you have presented. The other 3 we haven't heard from yet. So the time is yours to use unless they show up.
Okay.
And I see Greg is here, and he has a question in chat too. So
Okay, and I want to pick Dr. Richardson's brain about something different, but that could be a different moment. What my question for the group presenting from National is, do you as educators, or do your colleagues at National regularly, before this past year or because of this past year, do you teach online? And what are the parallels? What are the connections? What are the lessons to be learned in both directions on that?
well, one of the reasons I joined National in 2013 was because I was intrigued that institution had cracked the code. It has cracked the code in how to deliver online instruction in the teacher credential program, because I was very doubtful that could ever happen. I come from old school all the way. But Katie has been with National through many presidents of the United States, many, many decades. So she could give you a more clear answer about it.
1999, we offered our first online program. And when we went to WASC in Oakland, they said, how can you do this? How do you know that's the student sitting online that should be sitting in front of you in the classroom? And one of our chairs said, well, in a classroom, I never ask anybody for their driver's license. So it was like all of a sudden WASC sat back and looked at us like, That's right. We don't question. We go by however that student responds to our instructional strategies in class. And so we started back in 1999. And one of the things I wanted to share was the idea of, when you were talking about reading, is we had a huge PT3 grant. I think that's when I met Alan Jones all those years ago, Marsha Meridian and everybody. And we were working with Dr. Sally Ride, rest her soul, the lady astronaut. And we had all these wonderful science materials and everything. And we took them into the El Cajon Valley School District. And sadly, the children could not read at that level. And so we ended up using the materials to teach them how to read. We put the cart before the horse, as you were saying, right? Teaching those pre-service teachers the practice of something before the theory. And we did it only out of necessity. We had this grant, we had these materials, we had these grant monitors in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden the world was looking at us. Well, I think that's what's happening again. The world is still looking at us. And I think that your research is a fluid one now. How? Because all these changes that are coming up, people have to change their course outlines. They have to change their syllabi. They're going to be doing incredible things. And so I think that you've just begun your own research in this area.
I hope so.
Hey, Dr. Richardson, would you put on your mic?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being a little late, but I'm glad I'm here, and sorry I missed most of your presentation. I did have
That was fantastic.
for the team. Very interesting, and during this time that we're in during the pandemic, one of my concerns is, as Dr. Thorsos had mentioned, was the moderate to severe community. I know there are many challenges that the general ed student is facing, as well as the students with learning disabilities, challenges associated with their computers or the equipment, challenges with the internet, challenges with their skill level and so forth. But what do you think that we can do to assist that special population that have moderate to severe needs?
I have the I have the answer, my answer, but it's not data based. It's based on my experience. If I can answer that, it has to do with collaboration, and it's going to take the whole group, the districts, the Department of Education. It has to come from top as well as from bottom. From the field of the classrooms, from the teacher practitioners to tell us, to guide us of what is it that is needed and works. But it has to do with this whole global mentality that we have to shift, target where are the needs, and then develop the plan. We're really stuck into this cycle, almost like groundhog, that we keep repeating the way that we do our practices. So we need to start looking at other ways of the service delivery, but it includes districts and making decisions of the needs, making a needs assessment, and figuring out what and how, and where can we deliver these services for the moderate to severe. Right now, CTC has revamped our credential programs and inclusive collapsed from 7 credentials to 5. So we're going to this is a great opportunity for all of us to rethink about how is it that we're going to prepare teachers in the field that is relevant and significant and appropriate for these kids. And this is what these teaching remotely exposed. It really exposed some of the weak areas in our education system. So it's a great opportunity for us to look at the areas of improvement and start getting busy with that and finding solutions. But it's not an IHE or teacher credential issue. It's all of us involved with education issue. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Thank you. That's good.
May I reverse the question? What do you think, Dr. Richardson, is the solution? Or anybody else? Let's open it for everyone.
Well, as I think about the solution, my first concern is that so many of the students that have moderate to severe needs have one-on-one aids. And I'm wondering if the breakout sections would be an opportunity, breakout rooms be opportunity to assist these students more. I'm thinking about the different resources that they would need over and above your regular students with special needs. And it's going to be a real complex situation, almost like an IEP. Their educational services are going to be specifically tailored to the individual.
Thank
As
you.
I've thought
Anyone
about
else?
this
And then I
question,
can,
I'm sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
My concern, what I keep coming back to in my thoughts is the problem of engagement. Doing what we're doing as a bunch of adults is okay. Very few people love this format. As a kid, it's very difficult to sit through day after day. And for plenty of students with disabilities, the amount of engagement gets near zero. And I keep coming back to that idea of engagement. What can the teacher do from a distance to create engagement and have the student do something valuable, whatever that valuable thing is? The sit and listen is not that valuable. The student doing something valuable is valuable.
Yeah, and
Challenge. I don't have that.
yeah, and that's true. So it's just almost like a task analysis, looking at all the skills required for this service delivery online. So one is that it requires attention span, sitting down, manipulating the internet, the technology. But at the same time, it would trigger some other resources, such as an emphasis on parent support, looking at ways of having TAs, looking at the role of the TAs. How can the TA reach out, creating some opportunities for the kids at home to do some other activities that do not require sitting down and engaging on Zoom. They can have a list of activities in which the parents or the TA can come, assuming post-COVID, the TA can check off and make sure, there's a baby steps starting from doing one activity. Let's say, for example, walking around the backyard or getting into gardening and then labeling everything. There's different ways of teaching, even borrowing from the Montessori approach methodology that would really align with moderate to severe and other kiddos with different labels. So it's just that thinking out of the box, that it's not only engaging a kid with the material in front of them, that's the only way. There's multisensorial approaches. And I don't see why parents or other relatives cannot get involved in that child's learning process. So it's just we're going to have to start looking at our culture and our habits, the way that we go and believe that learning takes place. So it's almost like a revolution. It's a paradigm shift, I call it. So you're right, Hal, but I don't know, maybe I'm a dreamer, but I see this as a great opportunity because it just blew open this box that not all is well with the way we are handling the business of teaching kids with disability. We need to revisit this. This was, it really exposed a lot of these deficiencies. We have a lot of good stuff going on, but if you look at statistics, the outcome of children with disabilities that go through school system, not many end up with a diploma. So why is that? Why can't we do better than that? And so this is the opportunity to revisit this.
I think,
I'd like to echo what Dr. Thorsos said in the area of parental involvement. That would definitely be a major factor. So we would have to provide some type of training to the parents also so they can assist more effectively in the educational realm of their child's development academically. Another component, I think, especially with students with moderate to severe needs, is the time factor. 6 hours in a day, 4 hours in a day really is a long time to spend in front of a computer. In a homeschool setting, rather. Some of my reading, I found out that many homeschools are only meet maybe 3 hours a day, and it's been effective for them. Maybe we should adopt something like that, not necessarily 3 hours, but maybe an hour and a half that is targeted instruction that would help the student. And that would give them some opportunity to free their mind from the stress of working online or working remotely in whatever mode that they might.
Keith, you were going to say something?
yeah, listening to the conversation, I'm actually struck by a couple comments that were made. One is this need to think outside the box. The other is this very idea that this whole concept of what do the students need. And, reflecting on this, I'm actually drawn back to the early 1900s. In the early 1900s, Ford Motor Company was by far the largest, most powerful motor company in the world. And they were led by Henry Ford, who was absolutely in love with the Model A. And he believed that there was no better car in the world than the Model A. But with the construction of roads and with more competition using the concept of assembly lines, all of a sudden great advancements occurred that radically changed how we looked at automobiles. And Ford's refusal to leave the Model A idea brought this powerful company from a number one status to, the number three status that we have in today's world, and even bankruptcy. So as we're looking at our current reality, change never happens overnight. Change is something that gradually occurs over time. And so as I think about Kathleen talking about how in 1999, the whole concept of online instruction was radical. And, as we look at it right now, we're at this watershed moment. And how we have trained teachers in the past is not going to work in the future. Somehow this new technology is going to be infused into our daily life, both in the corporate realm and within the education realm. And so as I'm listening, I'm sitting here and I'm beginning to go, we've got to stop trying to cram our old way of thinking into our current realities. Because if we keep on trying to cram our old thinking into our current realities, we're going to continue to go with this very consumer-oriented view of humanity. And, and one of the things that technology is allowing us to do is to break down barriers. So we have Kathleen, who's here today from Hawaii. And, as we're looking at breaking down barriers, what about education in and of itself? Gregory's talking about, well, maybe school only needs to be 3 hours. And as you look at this with technology, we also have opportunities to cross-pollinate more, rather than having these silos of 10-year-olds and these silos of mild, moderate, and these silos of moderate to severe. And that's how our assembly line education has been working for decades, but it's not going to work in the future. We've got to figure out how to destroy these silos, how to cross-pollinate, people on the basis of humanity. So, I guess I'm just trying to encourage this conversation to continue to move in the direction of what should we be doing? How do we begin to move into viewing education through the lens of leadership, learning, discovery. And how do we begin to push down this idea of training and confining and restricting? So those are just some of the thoughts that emerged in my head as I've been listening to the conversation. And I don't know if there's a question in there or if you want to take off with this idea or
Excellent.
dismiss it.
Well, I love it, Keith, because that's why I mentioned the Montessori approach, because in Montessori, they group the children but differently. You know, the expectation is that just because you're 10 or you're 5 or whatever, all 5-year-olds are ready to go to kindergarten. That's not, idealistic, because we know right now based on research that not all 5-year-olds are ready. There's a developmental diversity there. So when you say that, one of the thoughts that I have is breaking down the barrier about special ed and looking at this as an opportunity for kids with disabilities to be in the classroom with, remotely with typical kids in general ed. Why can't that happen? Why can't the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher take this opportunity and regroup everybody so that we can learn from each other and have activities for inclusion? There's different ways of inclusion. This would be an opportunity. The how, I can't give it to you. Like, again, I say it's a whole mega approach from top to bottom, bottom to top, and a big conversation of what the needs are. But when you use the word cross-pollinized, that's a very good analogy about inclusion and about learning from each other. What are things that are working for you that could work for us? And looking at our resources of all the related services in special ed, how can we take those resources and implement it for all kids, typical and atypical learners? How can we look at that? Are there any options there? So just dismantling this whole idea that this is the way we do it, and we've been doing it through the 20th century, and it should work, be good enough now with all the technology, and rethinking that. It's just, this is the time to do it, because like it happened to Ford, and he paid the price, right? That company. Education doesn't have that, cannot afford that. We need to really find a way to reinvent and adapt to how to teach these digital learners. That's the other thing that we forgot to talk about. Who are these kids that are in front of us? They're not going to be able to, I don't think, learn the way that we were taught. And yet we're insisting in preparing teachers to teach the way we were taught. And that's a problem. I'm a grandmother of 6 children, 2 of which are in the spectrum of autism. And I've been witnessing a few things going on with my 2 grandkids as they're navigating this COVID-19 and learning remotely. The one, my older one that has Asperger's, he's loving it. He loves this remotely, and then he has all these other activities. The one that has autism that is has intellectual challenges, he can't handle that. He cannot handle an online environment, and he's moderate to severe. So these are stories that we need to follow and find out and learn that it's not one fits all. We have to find a way that we can really target and address the specific needs of these kids. And only the classroom teacher and the parents will know how to tell us what are these needs. It's not really the IEP or a system. We need to really rethink how is it that we're catering to these kids, and where are we getting that information, and how are we going to develop the plan to provide these services. This is the time to rethink this.
I'd like to
wondering if if sometimes we're asking the question the wrong way. We keep on talking about what do the kids need, as if we as adults somehow magically have the answer to that question. You know, and our education system was created for us to figure out what economic box we can put kids into. And, you know, the economic box has changed in the last 20 years. And society has changed in the last 20 years. And so, you know, if we keep on going back to that need, we keep on trying to figure out, to a certain extent, how to dehumanize a person so that we can put them in the right box so that this economic engine can continue to progress. I wonder if we should instead be looking more at what makes this child valuable, and how do we unleash that value so that that child becomes an integral part of our community. So rather than building, you know, rather than building kids to fit into community, we seek to change community to embrace kids. So I don't know if that's a paradigm shift that we should be looking at.
Well, I love that. I love that idea.
Well, that in a way corresponds. I'm in a high poverty community over here in Hawaii, Keith. And I have noticed in the last year or so that the families who have children with special needs are bringing them to church now. And they sit right in the middle of the congregation, and it does not matter how loud they get or how disruptive they get, the service continues. They're a part of the community. And I've often thought, in this high poverty community, a lot of jobs are not going to be there, even when we go back to whatever we become this new normal. And I keep wondering if there isn't some way that communities can kind of take the best of all of your ideas and actually become a part of those children's education. And it would take some creativity. It would take a lot of flexibility, because one of the things that Henry Ford did not have, he did not have flexibility. He used to say to them, give them any color they want except black. I have a background in strategic management, so Henry Ford was a very interesting man to study. But if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, what good is history, right? History is incorrect. And so how are we going to write the history for these children going forward? How are we going to make them a part of our history or her story or whatever that word becomes? But you're absolutely correct. We have to find a way. The community has to be integral. And this is not new. We know that Mrs. Clinton, she said, it takes a village. We've known this for decades. And yet we're making tiny baby steps, as Nilsa loves to say. And we need to take bigger steps.
Alan, what are you thinking? I'm looking at you and you're chewing on it. What are your
Thank you for
thoughts?
asking. I was thinking of a few things. I was thinking of the calls for paradigm shifts and significant change. And my revolutionary spirit welled up in me a little bit, but I'm going to rein it back enough to not sound too radical. I think one problem is the whole idea of K through 12. I do think in terms of what students need, and often that sense of need is shaped inside of a curriculum. It does not need to be inside of a curriculum, but as long as needs are in terms of the curriculum, attending to a student's needs has nothing to do with K through 12. Whatever their age, they're going to have a different kind of need for math than they do for reading, than they do for science, than they do for social studies, than they do for their social interactions. These are all going to be different categories of needs. And someone could be exceptionally advanced in one and exceptionally far behind in another, and trying to say, well, that averages out to grade 6, so there you go. That's probably not an effective paradigm that we're using, and finding a way around that, or getting rid of that, probably to our advantage, probably to the student's advantage, to doing their best stuff, getting what they need, even if we start getting away from the kind of paradigm that I'm using that's inside of a curriculum. Another thought that I had off of this, how much time are we going to demand that students sit in a chair and stare at their screen, and trying to keep that limited, is borrowing from the trend from a few years ago of flipping the classroom, where the lecture things happen on video and the praxis happened in person. And then maybe borrowing, while we do that, more from our TikTok generation, make these videos short and snappy. And you can have a ton of them. Make them short, make them snappy. Deliver what needs to be done in that minute and a half. Get out and show some fire when you're doing it. That might be one way to make the flexibility of the delivery of lesson part work. And then the time when the student is synchronously with you, you can engage on the specifics of the doing that you're having them do. Maybe there's something in there. That's what I was chewing on. A little bit of revolutionary spirit, not that much.
Well, go for it, because that's what we need, that spirit. How about you, Alan Jones?
I was thinking from what Hal was just saying that, we're talking about flexibility between age levels and, not categorizing people by grade, but also the disciplines. Why do we have everything in discipline boxes rather when, each discipline can speak to another discipline and offer things that would not be there otherwise? I think what we're really talking about is breaking down a whole lot of barriers in various ways. And that I think that's an exciting conversation. One other thing too, Nilsa, for all of you really, what do you think the gradual move towards inclusion is going to say about the whole field of special ed? What are the possibilities for special ed and general ed, again, to break down some of those barriers?
Well, I'm not the oldest in this group, but I've been in the battlefield since the 70s. And the reason that I moved from general ed to special ed was because I'm a warrior for that inclusion, mainstreaming mindset. And I will tell you that here we are in 21st century, and we're still battling and trying to get this idea of inclusion to be normalized. So I always said that general education was justified. It was the means for special ed. What I mean by that, and let's reverse it, special education justified general ed's referral for special ed. So because there was a special ed option to take these kids that had disabilities, it denied general ed the opportunity to really find solutions of how to address the needs of atypical learners. Because we know that the population, not 100% of us are typical learners. There are atypical learners. But with the presence of special ed as a discipline, it allowed general ed to say, well, you know what? This is not our problem. This is something that should go over here. You see it like a place. Special ed is a place. Well, special ed is a service. And the whole idea about special ed was to provide services for kids with disabilities and an opportunity, access to education in with kids without disabilities. But because of special ed being there, it kind of facilitated this rapid solution. We don't need to solve this right away. Let's just refer them to special ed and let them get the services there, including second language learners. It create that paradigm that kids with disabilities should go and to special ed as a discipline rather than staying in general ed and having general ed as a discipline, find solutions, ways to access these kids. So that was one of the impediments, the mindset that we have these two silos, general ed and special ed. And for many, many years, there was this the whole mindset that if you bring kids into the general ed, it would impede the learning of the typical kids because of the disruption and all that. And also our fear of certain behaviors that we can't control. As in our society, we fear that. We fear people with emotional disturbance or fear people that disturb the peace in public because it's an aberration. So we tend to label everything. That's part of our culture. We label everything. Even when we meet somebody for the first time, we tend to gauge them, right? And if they have an accent, I wonder where that person came from. This is not a English speaker. This is a second language. We tend to do that. That's our nature. So inclusion has been very difficult because it goes against the grain of our culture of labeling and placing people where we feel with good intentions that this is the best place for this individual to receive education, but not with the typical kids because it's just not fair for that kid. We've been with this message, with this mission for many years. Right now, CTC has done something marvelous, which is that common trunk idea that to really provide teacher training programs for all teachers. They're going to all learn from the trunk what all teachers need to learn and then branch out to their specialty. I think not until all of our generation dies off and then the new generation with this new mindset comes into place, into power, into the system, we will have a lot of challenges for this inclusion. It's picking up. I can tell when I go in the field that it's picking up more, being more normalized as the older generation teachers go away and retire. Especially you see it in the referral process. It's more is implemented more with fidelity for what it was intentionally established. But we still have problems with this whole idea that all children should learn together, and then their specific needs should be addressed with related services and support. That is a very hard thing to accept by many people.
One thing to think about in all of that is that you talk about general education. You know, we tend to think that there's some sort of a typical kid. Let's raise the question: is anybody typical, or is
right?
I mean, let's not get into that box right now.
Yeah.
Another thing too, our fall conference, which we hope will be in person in San Diego, fall of 2021, but we don't know for sure yet. Whichever way, it'll happen one way or the other. The theme for that is something that Virginia Kennedy and Vicki Graff are putting together on inclusion in part, and sort of looking at the term inclusion and looking at the notion of intersectionality, and sort of, are those the same thing? Are they different? In what ways? And where does that lead? I think all the questions you're talking about here today are going to be very relevant to that conference. And
definitely.
Also, it strikes me too, rather nice, that both of the research studies that have been described here today are ongoing. That you're not, you may be finishing with your dissertation, Hal, but you're not finished with that research. And the national folks have already said this is an ongoing study. So as those continue to evolve, they're going to fit into this topic that we're all looking at, I think, very relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to thank everybody, though, in this group here. I really, just listening to the feedback and comments validates a lot of what our group is thinking about and aspiring and dreaming and the vision. One thing that I always share with everybody, if you don't dream it and think about it, talk about it, it won't materialize. So I really believe that we all share that whole desire to really improve our teacher uh, support and the things that we do to prepare our teachers out in the field in the special ed and teacher ed, but really dreaming beyond that. What would it look like for these kids that are, in the future going to be charged with our society? So that's the big responsibility that we have. We are preparing teacher candidates to teach kids that it's an unknown what's going to happen in 20 years or 18 years with these kids, and what role are they going to take as citizens in our society. That's a big responsibility that we have, and it's not something that we laugh at. It's a serious charge that we have as in the teacher training programs in California.
Absolutely. We can laugh at it once in a while, but only to keep ourselves sane.
Indeed. Anybody else has any thoughts?
The rest of you, if you have any comments as we've got a few more minutes here. Let's hear from anyone.
I have my opinion. I listened with interest to everyone, and I thought I would put out this idea and see what you guys think. So in applied behavior analysis, we have something called behavior consultation. I think that this is the answer for teaching at home, online, where going back to what Nilsa was saying, and actually everybody hinted towards collaboration is most important. So maybe we should think of this revolution as like maybe a series of options, thinking about inclusion as well. So taking that into consideration that, we should not force, we should not put students with an IEP, so with the special needs into this box, that box, and give them only one option. Because the parents can choose, will my kid be able to benefit even socially from physical inclusion, social inclusion, not necessarily academic inclusion in some cases. So we should not take away that option, and see if the students want to be, or the parents would envision their kids benefiting more from home. Maybe some days, they will stay at home and they will benefit from one-on-one instruction, either with the parents or with TAs. And this is what behavioral consultation is, in that the teacher is teaching the parent or the TA what to do and how to do it, and then they do it. Or some days, or permanently, or I don't know, the parents will provide the option of, or will choose the option of bringing their kids to school and having them, in different rooms for inclusion, for one-on-one teaching, and so forth. So I think that this revolution is more a matter of options rather than let's find a solution and that is it. I think it's like multiple solutions.
I think the idea of options is right on target, and it brings to mind for me UDL. But what I was also thinking about, because of what Gabriela was saying, was not in my experience. And I'm thinking perhaps, especially in your experience doing ABA or other folks who focus on paraprofessionals or working with parents with kids who have special needs. Is there already a good system for training up paraprofessionals? Is there already a good system for training parents to play that role? It's in my imagination, it's a very difficult thing to ask a parent to play a totally different role.
Yes, but they live with this day in and day out. So
Yeah.
it's not just the 8 hours of school, it's what happens after school. How do you feed your child? How do you take to the restroom the child? How do you teach, what a parent should do? Teach them about everything,
So
including
are there
life.
successful models for this already?
Sorry?
Are there successful models for how to do this? Teach a
How to
parent?
do it at home?
How to teach a parent to take on those roles?
This is actually very thin research, to be honest, in the published literature, not too very well explored. More on the side of applied behavior analysis than in special education. But it is a very effective, it has been shown to be effective with anybody, like with mostly hospital staff. Behavioral consultation is very, has been documented since since the 70s. So I don't see why, a nurse or I don't know what comes like below nurse, sorry, in terms of ranking. So a person who takes care, like changes the patient and whatever, can be trained and the parent cannot be trained. And I understand there are different kinds of parents out there, maybe themselves with special needs sometimes. So that is when we can have a TA that goes out to the house and does this, the training one-on-one with the student.
Thank you.
One of the things that I have been noticing from my own students' research and comments and talking to them is the difficulty they're having now with some of their own paraeducators, because their paraeducators came out of a special education system and that perhaps they're autistic, and they're now becoming, Gabriela understands this, they're entering the job field. They're becoming paraeducators. Eventually they want to be teachers. And this communication difficulty of a general ed teacher talking to a paraeducator who won't maintain eye contact, won't do a lot of the other social cues that the general ed teacher is used to having when they have staff working with them. That's been an issue. Another opportunity that I really see from this entire conversation is I'm a baby boomer. I mean, there has to be a reason. There are so many baby boomers, and maybe it's this point in the world that we're supposed to come forward with a community focus, and we're part of the inclusion model. I mean, I think inclusion has to mean community. And of course, I'm sitting in a predominantly Polynesian society over here, where that would be like, no kidding, duh. Yes, of course, Ohana, right? But that is very, very powerful. And how many baby boomers now do have that technology skills? They do have careers behind them that can be translated into what Gabriela and Nilsa have been describing, that they can become part of the solution. Just like my mother, who lived to be 97, grew up in a one-room schoolhouse. And her people became the greatest generation, according to Tom Brokaw, right, with the World War II. And so, I mean, maybe it's the baby boomers' responsibility now, as the world moves forward, that we continue to give back, maybe in a different way, and become part of this inclusion model. Because if these young people, whether they're gen ed or special ed, are not identified, as you were talking about the value of what they can do in life, where they feel that they're contributing just like everybody else, and we see a lot of that out here where they cannot. I just really think that these are the issues that are part of our responsibility as we go forward. Those are my thoughts.
I'd like to add a thought. I think it was Kathleen who had mentioned it earlier, but identifying students' strengths, particularly for the moderate severe community, I think that's one way that we can get them prepared for the future, because they have skill sets that are so many times overlooked and not valued, that would be of significance to the population, the general population. And I think we need to find ways to identify their strengths and help them develop those strengths and utilize them, give them opportunity.
I think that's where family input's going to be really important too. Not just the immediate family, but the extended family.
Yeah, that whole asset based, if we could just change our mindset and to start thinking about, even bringing back opportunities for our kids in the field of special ed, that label is so still, to me, problematic. But just to finding other places in society where they can be successful and contributors to our society. I still lament the fact that they took out workshops and all these vocational ed opportunities from the classroom, from the school system, and with this revolutionary idea that everybody should go to college. So they forgot about asset base and about diversity, learning diversity. So just food for thought. So what would be a good way, a positive way to wrap up our session, Alan? Any ending thoughts?
Well, I think, well, first off, I want to thank those of you who made the presentations, Al and Nilsa, Gabriela, and Kathleen, your group. As I said before, these are things that are being studied and are ongoing, and that's really good to know. But I think just the conversation, we've raised an awful lot of really interesting questions that we don't have an answer to yet, but we're looking for it. So that, I guess my hope would be that we can keep this kind of conversation going and, into the next conference, into some other sessions or whatever. But that's kind of my thought about it. I'm excited that we're exploring, and I guess Keith seems to have left us, but Keith, you still there?
I see him. I see Keith.
Oh, okay.
I'm still here.
Yeah, well, just the whole notion of breaking down all the barriers and breaking down the things that have kept us in kind of in a structure that isn't realistic anymore. I think those are issues that are really important. They're not just teacher ed issues, obviously. They're much broader than that. But I think there's some exciting things to think about there. So thank you for bringing those in too.